Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on preparing the era of predictive customer intelligence. My name is Jan Keuppens. I work at Across Health, and today I have two of my finest colleagues with me, being Christophe and Sander. And throughout the course of the next 40 minutes, we will hopefully shine some light on the domain of predictive analytics. Before we start, a few practical tips and some practical rules with regards to the webinar. At the right-hand side of your screen, you will see that there's an attachment and links section. At the end of the webinar, we would really appreciate if you could take the time to rate and show your appreciation for this webinar. There's also the possibility to raise any question that you might have throughout the course of the presentation, so feel free to do so. If time permits, we will try to answer your questions immediately, and otherwise be sure that we will come back to you offline with the answers. So let's wait another 2 minutes for everyone to join, and then we can get going. Okay, the agenda for today. We will briefly start with an introduction and setting the scene around why we give this webinar. Afterwards, we will hopefully guide you through our across way of measuring success in a multi-channel world. As a third topic, we will, together with Christophe and Sander, show you and illustrate you our three-step approach on how you can move from reactively monitoring performance of your multi-channel initiatives into a more proactive steering way of dealing with analytics. We will round off the webinar by showing you one of our case studies in which the three steps will be clearly identified and explained by both myself and my other two presenters. Brief word around who we are. Across Health, we're a consultancy firm who solely operates in the life sciences space. So we're dealing with pharma companies, medtech companies, some professional associations as well. And we're helping those parties to embrace the new normal. So we're helping them to fuse their model from the traditional offline world, combining it with the power of new media and online. So we're helping them design the campaigns, creating strategies and developing strategies, but also rolling them out. And what the topic of today is, of course, we help them to measure what the successes of the initiatives they got running. Our company was founded some 11 years ago. We quickly grew to a company which is present in 7 different markets, and we service more than 7 markets remotely as well. But we have a staff of more than 50 consultants across the globe. And perhaps interesting to see also that throughout the course of the past few years, we've accumulated research and channel affinity insights for more than 15,000 healthcare professionals, payers, and patients. But I will come back to that later. Why are we hosting this webinar on analytics and predictive intelligence? From our multi-channel Maturometer research, which is an annual research that we conduct with customers and prospects, so with professionals in the life sciences industry. We know, and this is 2017 results, we know that ROI is still a hot topic. When we ask pharma companies to identify what their key hurdles are for embracing digital and multi-channel in their organization, you can see that compliance and regulatory issues is a big one. Also internal knowledge, so skill development of people. But as you can see in third position for the 2017 research, we know that ROI is keeping people awake at night. People are struggling with how to measure the success in a multi-channel world. Furthermore, we also see that our respondents are really struggling with it, and we see that 20% of our respondents in Europe only illustrate that or indicate that they're feeling really comfortable on and know how to measure impact, which is precisely, I would say, the reason why we're hosting this particular webinar. Instead of complaining and asking ourselves questions around how should I do it, I'm not capable of doing it, we will try to shine some light and give you some tips and tricks on how you should approach multi-channel analytics in its most rudimental form, and eventually also how you can step it up and take it to the level of where your data becomes a predictive indicator of success. In order to be able to talk about predictions, etc., I think we should guide you through our approach on how we measure success within Across Health. For the next 5 to 6 minutes, hopefully I will be able to illustrate that it's not only about counting numbers. No, at Across Health we have a structured approach which we adopted from the fast-moving industry, and which will help you bring a sound analytics framework within your organization. When doing workshops or training sessions across the globe with a multitude of customers, when abording the topic of analytics, we always tend to, instead of doing a lecture or one-way lecturing of slides to them, we always start with a quiz, asking them the $1 million question: how would you measure the campaign success in a multi-channel world? And from my own experience, results are really striking. Depending on the people that you have in front of you, is it a senior executive or is it a marketeer, a digital project manager? Answers seem to be completely different. If you would ask a marketeer or an operational resource around how he or she measures the impact of a multi-channel campaign, what we see typically is people start yelling out, yeah, I look at the number of visitors I have on a monthly basis on my website. I look at click-through rates of my email campaigns. I look at the average time that people spend on my website, open rates of emails, participation rates, so the number of participants in live and recorded webinars. One common denominator for these answers is that we're talking about numbers. So numbers give you a good indication around whether you can be successful, but nevertheless, it does not tell you anything around what the motivation is or the engagement of the person clicking on an email or visiting your website. So that's the first downside. So counting numbers, that's much more to it than that. If we ask the same question, the $1 million question, how do you measure success, and we're talking to a senior executive or a general manager, they typically jump to the more lagging indicators of success, being, well, return on investment, sales growth, market share, cost effectiveness, etc. What is common to the answer of the digital marketeer and the senior executive? Well, they're both talking about numbers, but as said, the senior executive is looking at success in a quantitative way, but focusing on indicators which are lagging. In the past, at the time when we only had one promotional channel, you were perfectly capable of addressing the question and saying, what can I expect from my sales evolution if I tune up my field force, if I add additional capacity to my sales force? In a multi-channel context, that is far more difficult. And that is precisely why, if we talk about measuring success in a multi-channel world, we talk about our 4-quadrant approach. Horizontally, you can see that we make a split between quantitative indicators, quantitative metrics, and qualitative. From left to right, you can see that we look into specific metrics that tell you something around how good or how bad a specific channel is performing. Whereas in the second column, you see that we also try to measure the indirect effect, the effect not over the specific channel, but the effect on prescription intention, on the brand, on the the perception of your company, etc. So let's start with the left quadrant, reach and advocacy. That is typically the answers that were given by the marketeers, the digital project managers. So email opens, click-through, number of referrals, number of web visits, etc. In reality, how do you measure this? Well, you measure this by looking at, I think, the dashboards that you currently have running within your company. What are those numbers telling you? You're trying to influence your target audience, so you're trying to trigger a mindset change. You're trying to convince, let's say, physicians to go from a state where they're unaware of your treatment option or your brand to become a first prescriber and in the end a loyal prescriber, so pushing them up the adoption ladder. Reach and advocacy numbers, so number of clicks, number of views, is only giving you an indication with regards to, am I capable of reaching the audience that is important to me? If we move one step up, so let's assume that you're capable to establish a decent reach. You will be able, you will need to address the question, I'm reaching, let's say, 25% of my target audience by means of an email marketing wave, but what does this tell you with regards to their engagement? What is the qualitative indicator in that? Well, good ways of addressing that question is by looking at how people accept your channel, how they rate your channel, whether they judge the message that you were bringing across to be clear to them, etc. That's from a theoretical point of view. How would you abord this question in a practical way? A good way of doing it is, and I think you're all familiar with it, for example, the star ratings. If you have a portal or an online or a mini site online, you can perfectly ask for people's appreciation of this particular channel and the content that they're confronted with by asking them to rate it. In that way, you create also a form of, I would say, some sort of mini community, because people can rely on what their peers are telling them with regards to the quality that they're offering you. Another way of doing it is like the thumbs up and thumbs down from YouTube, but a more advanced way is an approach that we call the customer impact tracker, where not only time triggered, but when people visit your online presence, should it be a portal or a website, we can perfectly configure the trigger of a mini survey. So not only, most of the time when you see those type of initiatives, you land on a homepage and you immediately are confronted with, please show me how you appreciated the content, whilst you're still in the midst of trying to look for the content. What we're doing here is we're configuring a mini survey that is triggered not only on a time-based, but that can also be event-based. So you can determine if a person jumps to this page and on top of that, he or she spends more than, let's say, 2 minutes on this particular element of your web presence, then and only then will we ask them the question, did you find what you were looking for and how did you appreciate your experience on the website? Okay, so you managed to reach your audience by means of star ratings and mini surveys. You're capable of identifying whether people are engaged. Hopefully they are. And if people are engaged, that can also be a predictor of how likely they will convert. Whereas we now only talked about channel-specific ones, we will now do the crossover towards what multi-channel means for your brand. A good way of looking into engaged people, are they really converting and are they really changing their mind from a first prescriber to a loyal prescriber? The easiest way of finding out is by simply asking them, what is your prescription intention, etc. A good tip from our side to look into conversion metrics is bringing in the concept of Net Promoter. Net Promoter Score, NPS, for those not acquainted with it, it has been developed by Frederick Reichheld some years ago. And from research, we know that the Net Promoter Score is a good indicator, and the trend of the Net Promoter Score is a good indicator of customer loyalty. In essence, what it comes down to is asking your audience one simple question. How likely would you recommend my brand, my company to appear? And the answer possibilities range from a score from 0 to 10. So on a scale from 0 to 10, people answer how likely they would recommend your brand to appear. We have 3 buckets. People scoring you 6 or lower are the ones which we call detractors. Those people, if they talk about your brand, it's very probable that they will talk bad about your brand. The people scoring you a 7 or an 8, let's forget about them for now. Those are what we call the passive ones. And then you still have the group of the 9s and the 10s being the advocates, the promoters. So, and simply Net Promoter Score is a simple metric that is obtained by detracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. Easy metric, everyone understands. People running the program, but also senior people, once established within your company, a really effective way of looking into conversion. And then last but not least, as said, the senior executives also always go for cost effectiveness and ROI, sales and market share. When looking into success measurement in this 4-quadrant approach, you can use the 3 leading indicators, reach, advocacy, engagement, and conversion, as predictors of a positive impact on your effectiveness. If you manage to reach a maximum number of people within your audience, and if you manage to engage them through the channels that they're exposed to, your chances that they will convert and move up the adoption ladder are higher. If they do so, well, it's only a natural consequence that they will start prescribing or boost the number of prescriptions that they generate for your brand. That is, in a nutshell, how we approach success measurement. So the framework, we could spend hours over it, taking a deep dive into it, but that would take us too long. Let's move on to the next topic, where we take a first step of trying to move from reactive monitoring of success to really leveraging the data to your benefit, and by doing so, really starting to proactively steer your promotional efforts in the right direction. There are 3 layers to it. The first and most simple layer is the plan and execution layer, where we use a concept called Multichannel Equivalents. Later on, Christophe will talk about spot and sell, lead generating and lead scoring model. And then afterwards, Sander will talk you through the predictive layer. But let's start with plan and execute. Based upon multi-channel equivalents. I trust a lot of you already are acquainted with the multi-channel equivalents, but nevertheless, if we want to explain you the methodology of planning and executing a campaign, I think it's only fair that we give you the basics. So multi-channel equivalence is one of the concepts that is derived from a primary research, which we call the cross-channel navigator, where in essence, over the past 5 years, I think, we spoke to more than 15,000 respondents. So a large part are healthcare professionals. I think we cover 10 specialties and more than 15 geographies. But that's the details. In essence, what it does, it's primary research in which we try to, amongst other objectives, try to establish what the channel affinity is and the channel impact of a specific set of channels on the prescription behavior of your target audience. As said, people, through panel providers, we reach out to healthcare professionals and we confront them with a portfolio of 50 or 50 plus channels, horizontally segmented between offline and online channels, and vertically you see the color coding. We also make a split between the channels that are in full control of the pharmaceutical company. So your company is controlling the red and the blue ones, the red being the promotional channels, the blue being the medical and service channels. The green series are typically the third parties that you hook up with in order to be successful. let's say a booth at a congress is like an example of an offline paid channel, but a banner on a third-party fora is an example of a paid third-party online green data series. And then the last bucket is the earned channel. Those are channels which you cannot plan for. The earned channels, but nevertheless are very important. You cannot buy your way into the heart of an opinion leader, of a nurse, but we know that the opinion of a colleague, of a nurse, of an opinion leader, etc., is very highly influential. So that's why we also ask our panel to look into those channels. If there are a multitude of questions, but if there are two questions that you need to remember from our cross-channel navigator, is these two. So out of the portfolio of 50 channels, we ask the physician, which channels did you encounter in the past 3 months? Suppose that he or she indicates 5 to 6 of them. For the ones that they ticked, we will then ask them a second question, being, and to what extent did this influence your prescription behavior? Of course, there's I would say, a social desirable answer there. No one likes to admit being influenced by a TV commercial or a radio commercial, and to exclude this social desirability bias on top of the question, how are you influenced by this channel? We also ask them, to what extent does it influence your peer? So 2 questions. The answer to these questions allow us to establish a reach over impact graph. The reach on the left-hand side is nothing more, nothing less than the percentage of respondents saying that they have been exposed in the past 3 months to one or another channel. And then the impact question on a scale from 0 to 10 is the second question. To what extent did it influence me and my colleagues with regards to the prescription behavior? Okay, very insightful, but nevertheless, can you start comparing channels with one another? No, the scaling is completely different. How can you compare the influence of a good face-to-face interaction by a key account manager to an impression that was generated by an online banner? You can't. And that is precisely why we introduced multi-channel equivalents. In essence, what it does, so for every channel, we have a theoretical impact. So by introspection, the panel said, I judge the impact of a rep, in this example, at 6. What we do is we will try to normalize all other channels and express their impact in their relative weight compared to what the impact of a rep is. As you can see, the impact of a rep is 6. We use that as unit of measurement, so we set it to 1 and we derive the impact of all the other channels. As a second step, it's not as simple as that. We also apply interpolation to open up the scaling. But in essence, what it brings you now is, like you saw with the performance map, you get a multi-channel equivalence map, where on the left-hand side you see the reach, which is exactly the same. What percentage of physicians can I reach, in theory, by leveraging a particular channel? And on the impact scale, you can see that the rep impact has been set to 1, and all other channels are expressed in their relative weight compared to the rep. Okay, so multi-channel equivalence, a fruit basket, which was a performance map, is now turned into a fruit basket where you can start comparing apples to apples. One multi-channel equivalence can be the addition of a multitude of interactions through various channels, making up for the same impact compared to a face-to-face conversation. As an example, in the middle you see the icon with the envelope. Let's say that your target audience it consists of 1,000 physicians. From the research, we know that this particular channel has a theoretical reach of 34%. By looking into the multi-channel equivalent impact, of course, we also know what the relative weight is of an email newsletter compared to a sales rep. And beware, this is fictitious data. So it's a simple calculation where you say, I can reach 34%, meaning out of the 1,000, I reach 340. What does this mean? 340 interactions through this channel. If you weight with MCQ impact, you get a score for this particular weight of 197 multi-channel equivalent impacts for this particular newsletter channel. Okay? To close out this bit, multi-channel equivalents, very useful. Why? In the planning phase, it allows you, it gives you a basis for good sound channel decisions. And furthermore, when starting to build your campaign, a year campaign or a multi-year campaign, based upon this concept, you can upfront start anticipating and simulating what the theoretical impact or the, I would say, the impact objective is of the campaign at hand. That's one thing. On the other hand, next to reach and impact, there's of course also the economic reality of budgets and euros. So this model allows you to really optimize your channel mix, not solely from reach and impact point of view, but really it becomes, I would say, a resource allocation tool. That's in the planning phase. In the execution phase, well, no-brainer. By introducing multi-channel equivalents and the cost per multi-channel equivalent, you're perfectly capable of comparing channels with one another. So on one hand, you're capable of monitoring the overall campaign performance, but you can take a deep dive into the contribution of individual channels, and you can base some campaign decisions upon what you see. If a channel is underperforming, you might consider de-investing and deprioritizing this channel, and perhaps instead of going for another banner campaign, leverage an additional direct mail campaign. Which brings us to the second step, which is lead and sell. Christophe, go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone, this is Christophe Brock. I'm taking our multi-channel equivalent step one step further by going into lead qualification. And lead qualification basically is it's split up between lead scoring and lead profiling. And to give you better understanding what this actually means, well, with lead scoring, basically you have a method at hand which ranks your leads based on their previous activity data into a sort of qualification, allowing you to see which leads are more likely to be hooked than leads who have less interacted with your campaign. So obviously, it's not because somebody interacted a lot with your campaign that the value of that particular lead becomes high for you. Additionally, you want to add to that some profiling, which is based not only on what you have seen as past interactions from people, but also on what you have from information on them, information which is typically in your CRM system or insights you have gathered so far comparing a lead to what would be your perfect customer, right? So in essence, when you want to compare or when you want to target a particular physician based on a lead score and a lead profile, it allows you to make the distinction between a GP in a small practice who has a very high lead score and basically compare that or see that that person might be less important to you than a specialist, which is another profile of person in a larger hospital which has potentially or which has a higher potential. So why should lead qualification matter to you, and why may you consider moving into lead scoring? Well, basically, some of the things we have been using lead scoring for is to enlighten the field force. So basically, you give additional information to your field force, allowing them to better target their next best visit, and obviously hopefully allowing them to have more efficacy and efficiency in their calls by reaching out to the people who are most right for the next call. Additionally, because of the process of lead qualification, there is a lot going on in the back in terms of measurement, and basically it allows you to be more effective in bringing the right message across. The right message across, if you know that some people are not yet exposed to a certain message, well, because you have set up your lead profiling, you may get a better indication of which messages have been seen or not. Basically, if you want to move your organization to becoming more data-driven, the lead qualification is really a very good next step. It puts your data to work. It steps away a bit from the aggregate reporting, which we see very often still appearing at many of our clients, which are actionable in a sense, but are not making use of the full potential of the data which is available and which is captured during the campaign. And additionally, it is for sure when you want to move, and Sander will elaborate further on this, when you want to move into predictive analytics, it will for sure help you. The lead profiling will be the first step into move into predictive analytics, and it will also allow you to evaluate channel impact by looking at real data. So how does it work? Well, in fact, the concept is fairly simple, right? So you have leads who are interacting with your campaigns, and based on what they are doing on your campaign, like opening emails, accessing your website, attending webinars, we are assigning scores to those interactions. And these scores, for this, we take the MCQs, which Jan explained before, at hand as our baseline. But obviously, an MCQ, it gives you an indication of, okay, if somebody that has interacted with a website says it has this amount of impact on his prescribing behavior, but it doesn't distinguish between very high, deep level of engagement with your website or lower level of engagement. So basically, with lead qualification or with lead scoring, you can give scores to very specific sections on your website, very specific interactions on your website to come up with a total score, a total lead score. So apart from building your lead score, there are also a few parameters which can decrease your lead score. And this is basically based on inactivity. For example, somebody who has interacted with you in the last week may be more interesting or hotter or have you more top of mind than a person which you have not interacted with in the last 3 months or half a year. So there is some decay possible. Additionally, when they, for example, opt out of your campaigns, these are all indicators which can reduce your score and make people less important to, for example, have your field force target for the next visit. Additionally, and now we're coming to the profiling itself, you can, when you enrich your lead scores with profiling information from your CRM, you can really come to the perfect customer or come to a score which is really weighted based on how impactful or how good that customer could be for you. So for who may these lead qualifications and lead scoring be important? Well, I already talked about the field force who may have access via interactive dashboards or interactive views on the data on your customers. Next to that, we also have marketeers for which obviously this information is very valuable. So there are a few ways to work with the data. So you have you have tools around on the internet which really allow you to send automatic messaging based on certain lead scores being generated, or additionally, and that's if you don't have such automatic tools available, you could also extract from this lists of HCPs which you may want to target with certain messages based on the lead scores you have generated during the campaign. So the lead scores itself, well, when I was talking about the field force using this, there are a few views which really allow you to, or allow the field force to do proper campaign planning or to proper visit planning. And one of the things, or an example is shown here, where you can see on an overlay map where would be the customers that have a very high lead score, and based on the coloring, you could indicate or give an extra sense of how important that potential customer or already customer could be for you. Additionally, we also have some created in the past some correlation graphs which put the lead scores next to the actual sales being generated at that client, which is also an interesting way to look at the data and see if whatever your customer is doing and how that customer is interacting with your campaign, if that indeed leads to higher sales. Now, key lessons we have learned from experience so far is that you can make your lead scoring very complex if you want, right? So you can tag every type of page or every page even on your website, every piece of content, every email that you send. You can give different scores if you would like to. But obviously this is not the most efficient way of doing it, although it gives you an enormous richness in your data. It does require a lot of effort to start tagging all this every time there is new content available, to tag that content, to give scores to that content. And in the end, it is not always to the benefit of the people that need to interpret the data that you have a very complex system of lead scoring. So we tend to go to a more simple version of the lead scoring where you could work with, imagine you have a website and you talk about efficacy of your product, you talk about mode of action. So you could group all pieces of content, all pages, which are, for example, linked with this mode of action or with the efficacy, you could give that a similar score. And this obviously reduces the work you need to do into scoring your assets individually. And the costs are obviously a lot lower of keeping the system up and running. Additionally, it's much easier to explain to the persons who are using the lead scores to explain, okay, how the score is built up, and also to see or to show to them with which pieces of content your leads have been interacted with so far. So, lead scoring is very interesting, but there are a few things you need to keep in mind before engaging into lead scoring. And one important asset which is strange enough sometimes mixed up is that lead scoring should be on individual leads. It does not make sense to build up lead scores on an entire campaign and report on that on an aggregate way, because in the end, it doesn't really tell you anything if campaign A has a lead score of 1,000 and campaign B has a lead score of 1,200. We prefer to use, or we strongly suggest to use the MCQ model if you want to use it on a campaign level. Lead scoring should really be on individual user level or individual HCP level. And in order to do this, obviously there are a few things which you require. And the first and most important one is that you would need to be able to track your audience across the different channels on an individual level. And so the more channels you can track your customers through on an individual level, the richer your data will be. Additionally, you will need to have the tools available to not only score your leads, but to report on these scores and to give suggestions on what you would need to do as a next best step to actually interact with these leads and to bring them to the next step of the adoption ladder, or to engage them into going further with you or your brand. Additionally, it's recommended that you have CRM system in place, which is the case for many, and what makes it absolutely the most powerful, if you also have sales data which you can link with your lead force. So obviously, we don't always have sales data on individual user level, but there are some ways to get more aggregate sales data and still link that up with lead scoring. So we have built up some expertise with that. If you're not really sure if you have the capabilities or these prerequisites in-house, Across Health offers an omni-channel data health scan, which basically looks at your customer data and your reporting capabilities to see if you are in fact ready, and it looks at a whole set of parameters and evaluate and give suggestions on what to do next in order to move into a lead profiling in the lead profiling space. Okay, and then we move it to the next step, and I give the floor to Sander.
Thank you, Christophe. So in the next couple of minutes, I would like to guide all of you through, first of all, what predictive analytics is, and then how it differs from lead scoring, to then have a look at what's required to actually do it, to start with predictive analytics, and what other companies are using it and how they are using it. So if people ask me what is predictive analytics and how does it differ from normal analytics like we've seen in the past 40 minutes, then I automatically think about an iceberg. It's what we've discussed before is actually looking at the data we get in and the data as is. Whereas with predictive analytics, we really try to see the entire iceberg, and we also look at how that data interacts with each other. So we don't only look at the individual data points, but we also have a look at how they correlate and how they interact with each other. And if I would have to give a definition of what predictive analytics is, it would be that we look at current and historical facts to then see how they impact, for instance, sales or prescriptions. And based on that, we try to make predictions of the future and be more effective and more efficient in how we communicate and to who we communicate. So what's different between lead scoring and predictive analytics? Well, first of all, predictive analytics is a lot harder to set up. It requires much larger data sets, and the data needs to be very accurate. And secondly, it's not just involving mathematics, it's not just counting numbers, it's really statistics and looking at how things interact with each other. And it's not as easy as you might think, and as lead scoring is. It's very important to involve the right people and to do things correctly, or you might end up completely in the wrong space. Thirdly, it's really about interactions of channels. If we would look at the lead scoring, we would say, for instance, that you have one call and you had one rep visit, so that's 2 contacts. Whereas with predictive analytics, we look at that one call and that one visit, but we also look at how those 2 channels interact with each other. And it might be that they strengthen each other, and that instead of just 2 contacts, it ends up at 3 contacts, or the value of 3 contacts. And it also gets better as the amount of data you have increases. So the more data that you use to make your model, the better or the more accurate the outcome will be. So that means that you need a significant amount of data to start, but you don't need big data to start using it. And you can build on your model, and as more data comes in, your model will keep growing and get more accurate over time. And then a final difference, and to me that's the most important one, is that we really look at behavior and not that much at perception or what healthcare professionals say. So if, for instance, you would ask a healthcare professional to what extent they were impacted by an article on social media, it might be that they say that it will not really impact their prescription behavior. Whereas if you look at behavior, it might be that when having to prescribe the next time, he, without really noticing it, he thinks back to that article and prescribes that product anyway. So to really focus on the real impact of each channel, we look at behavior at predictive analytics. So when does it become relevant and when is it applicable to you? When can you use it? Well, first of all, you need a lot of data, and that data can be split in two kinds of data. First of all, you need activity data, which basically comes down to data of your communication on an individual level. So what kinds of communication, what kinds of channels have you used to what specific healthcare professional? And secondly, you need conversion data. The most straightforward one there is sales data, but it can also be a net promoter score that you want to increase. Secondly, that data needs to be complete. You need to have a 360-degree view of your customer, and the data needs to be correct. If you would work with wrong data or almost correct data, what you're actually doing then is garbage in, garbage out. You build your model based on untrustworthy data, so the model that you're making will then be untrustworthy as well. And finally, you need to have the ability to act upon the outcome. You can have a predictive model that predicts perfectly who is most likely to start prescribing in the future. But if you're not able to quickly act upon that opportunity, then I can predict that the investment is not really worth it. Okay. And then also some examples, because obviously we're not the only ones in this space. Salesforce has a product called Salesforce Einstein, and what it actually does is three things. It focuses on what channels have the biggest impact in converting someone. Secondly, it creates a lead score, just as Christophe discussed previously, but based on statistics. And finally, it also tells you what is the next best step to convert that person. So you know what channels are interesting to use, you know what potential client is most likely to become a real client in the future, and you know what action you should take to really convert that client. And then there's also an example, and I personally really like this example, of a retailer called Target, and it's about how they knew sooner than the dad of a teenage girl that that teenage girl was pregnant based on her behavior online and in the store. And at home, they all of a sudden started getting coupons for baby clothes and baby food, and dad did not know what hit them. So he went to the store and he had a talk with the store manager, who could not explain what happened. So all he could do was apologize. But a couple of days later, that dad came again to the store to say, "You were not the person who had to apologize. I was, because to be fair, I had a discussion with my daughter, and it seems like you were right in sending those coupons because she was in fact pregnant." So they were able to predict pregnancy of that girl sooner than she telling it to her father, just because of her behavior online and in the store. So That's it on predictive analytics for now, and now we will guide you through a case study. Yeah.
Right. Conscious of time, we will speed up a bit. We still have 10 minutes to go, but in order to really start practicing what we preach, so we showed you the theoretical three-step model, where we use MCQ for planning and execution purposes, so monitoring the performance. Christophe talking about lead scoring, and then Sander talking about how you can leverage activity data to your own benefit by trying to predict what the ideal sequence is of channels that you should leverage, what the right customer or what the hottest customer is to talk to in order to drive additional sales. And this is precisely the same three-step approach that we applied for one of our customers, where in essence, to set the scene, we were dealing with a devices company that was active in a high prevalence condition, predominantly for elderly, where the surgery alternative to their device was considered in most cases far too hazardous for the elder patients, leaving a lot of patients untreated and suffering with their condition. So they had all the evidence and the numbers to back them up. They had a new novel percutaneous treatment solution other than surgery, but the challenge that they were facing was that not all their patients found a way to a center where they could get the treatment that they were pushing. So in essence, they came to us and they said, can you help us to, in the first phase, focus on our focus markets, but the bigger picture was that we needed to focus on the entire European geography of primary care physicians and also the bigger population of people active in cardiology. So nurses, heart team failure members, cardiac surgeons, echocardiographers, etc. And where the whole idea of the campaign was, can you help us raise awareness and educate people on our treatment, that this is a valid alternative for surgery, and by doing so, by driving more people into a knowledgeable doctor, hopefully generating additional procedure or additional sales. What in essence we did, the three steps: plan, execute, spot and sell, and predict. The planning and the execution, well, we maximize outreach to our target audience in the focus markets by involving sales teams to help recruit physicians into our multi-channel program. So we used multi-channel equivalent approach to plan and build a campaign, which consisted of a central portal as the beating heart and 8 other channels that we leveraged to drive traffic. And with the traditional dashboarding, we continuously measured and monitored the performance of the campaign to steer and fine-tune where needed. That was in the first phase. And in the campaign, at a certain time, we started making the switch towards a more proactive approach. So initially, we were dealing with a multi-channel campaign that was operating in isolation next to the field force, although the field force were helping us to recruit physicians by means of email collection, etc. And then gradually, we went for the lead generation approach that Christophe will explain to you a bit later. And more recently, we're entering the predictive phase, so the third step. What did it look like? Planning and execution of the multi-channel campaign. As said, in the planning phase, we used the multi-channel equivalent concept and the cross-channel navigator to determine what channels are most impactful for the focus market or focus markets. So you know what channels you should leverage or could leverage, ideally, but that does not tell you anything about the context or the content of the format. So next to that, we also did a series of virtual focus groups, where in essence we brought members of the target audience together in a remote setting, and we took a deep dive into campaign suggestions and campaign imagery, etc., to test whether what we were about to do was impactful. And a third planning initiative was going for an ecosystem scan. So next to knowing what channels they use and what content they prefer, we also looked at, if they're online, what are typically the digital instances or resources that they consult. As already said, we translated these insights into a multi-channel campaign, where the online portal, the educational and awareness raising portal, was the beating heart. 8 channels were driving traffic to that. And as Christophe said, in the backend, we had a very solid CRM backbone capable of consolidating channel interactions on a nominative level. So on a doctor level, we could keep track of what an individual doctor was doing. As said, this might not apply to the entire pharmaceutical industry. This is a medtech environment, so we had the possibility of consolidating all the data.
So very quickly, we have so we created a dashboard for that customer for marketing and to compare channel impacts. After which we moved to the lead scoring, and the lead scoring results or outcome were shared with the reps via their tablets or on their browser via ClickSense, visualizing basically the lead scores of these physicians.
As a result of the campaign, you cannot talk about a case without showing the results. After having started this campaign, where the majority of the devices business unit sales remained quite flat, this particular procedure for the past few months and the last year announced a double-digit growth. So that's the external component. The internal component of it is that by involving sales teams, we moved away from a situation where sales teams considered multi-channel to be their virtual competitor. No, we leveraged the data to their benefit. The outcome and the perceived engagement in a campaign was used to feed them back with dynamic target lists, telling them or suggesting to them what the next doctor was that they should go and visit because we see that he or she is hot from a lead scoring perspective.
So we've now seen the lead scoring model and that it has double-digit growth. So the main question then could be, can it still get better? And the answer is yes. I'm going to share 2 numbers with you that show how impactful predictive analytics can be. When looking at the data and when building the model, we try to forecast whether a healthcare professional would start prescribing or referring the product in the future or not. And the first model that we made based on the data we currently have available was correct in 49% of cases. So that means that 49% of the healthcare professionals were indicated correctly when answering the question, will they refer or will they remain a non-referrer in the future? And a second one, and that's an even stronger one, is when looking at the actual prescribers or referrers. And if we dare look at how well we forecast them, to what extent were we able to say they will start referring in the future, well, then we were able to do it 4.5 times better than the lead scoring model. So the lead scoring model was able to generate a double-digit growth. Predictive analytics is able to target 4.5 times better who will start referring as well. All that together, to me, is proof that predictive analytics can really add value to the marketing teams. So what's next? What do we plan to do with this predictive analytics in the future? Well, we would like to discover and to know what channels reinforce each other, what channels interact and strengthen each other, discover how many contacts that are needed to actually convert a healthcare professional, learn the individual impact of each channel for that specific campaign, and then get insights in what channel, what the ideal channel sequence is, and what the next step should be in converting a healthcare professional. And all that together actually means more for less. It means that we can target healthcare professionals in a more effective way, but also in a more efficient way. So I'd say the future is ours. I would like to thank all of you for your time, and if there would be any questions left, we are happy to address them.
Thank you, Sander. As said, the case that we presented started off from a simple multi-channel campaign aiming at raising disease awareness and educating physicians, leveraging 8 channels, into the engagement that you see in a campaign, using it to feed it back to the Salesforce, and now in the third phase, in the predictive, based upon the historical data, Sander has created a model which is capable of predicting and checking whether we were capable of saying whether a doctor, after seeing a specific engagement, was likely to refer or start prescribing a specific treatment option. The future is ours. I think it's a very nice slide. This last bit around prediction is something that for this year and next year, we will try to put into practice, and for the same campaign, we will indeed test our statistical model, the predictive model that we have, to see whether we can make this brand even more performant than it already is. I see that we don't have any questions so far. I would like to wish you a very nice evening. I think if you have additional questions or individual projects or ideas that you might have and want to discuss with us, feel free to reach out to us. And please check out our website to check any other upcoming events that we have planned. Wishing you a nice evening and see you. Bye-bye.